How does this look? What about this? This one will do.
Good morrow everyone, Soulcalibur here, and welcome to the first episode of my brand new series Palette Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. And by your favorite fighting games, I mean my favorite fighting games, and by my favorite fighting games, I mean Soulcalibur. Today, we're looking at the traumatized blonde with a greatsword, no, not that one, Siegfried Stauffen. But before we begin our analysis, here's a quick refresher course on who Siegfried is and what we should be looking for in his character designs. Siegfried's father was a famous knight who taught him the ways of the sword and served as a role model for the impressionable boy. But when he was called off to war, Siegfried began to fall in with the wrong crowd. In fact, he began to lead the wrong crowd, namely a band of thieves called the Black Wind. One fateful night, Siegfried and his not-so-merry men ambushed a group of knights who had deserted from the army, and you can probably guess where this is going. Upon slaying their leader, Siegfried was horrified to learn that it was none other than his father. He promptly suffered a mental breakdown, ran off into the forest, and decided that the final 4 stages of grief are for losers. He convinced himself that the only thing that could have killed his father was the cursed sword, Soul Edge. One arcade mode later, he found Soul Edge on the ground, its previous wielder having come down with a bad case of getting stabbed by a ninja. We'll get to that in a later episode. The cursed sword called out to Siegfried, saying that it had the power to revive his father, but only if he could gather enough souls as a sacrifice. Siegfried accepted the Faustian offer and was transformed into the Azure Knight, Nightmare. But of course, Soul Edge always seemed to need just a few more souls. Siegfried eventually broke free from Soul Edge's control and set out on a path of redemption, which included becoming the wielder of the holy sword Soulcalibur and battling against the forces of a new Nightmare. But some scars never truly heal. I think Siegfried is a good character to kick off this series, not only because he's my boy, but also because his 1P from Soul Edge is about as average as designs get. He's a generic anime boy in a generic suit of knight's armor, gets the job done, but it doesn't really do anything to stand out. I do appreciate that they opted not to give him a helmet, as his youth is an integral part of his story that should be reflected in his character design, but other than that, I don't have much to say about this one. It's a 5 out of 10, which will serve as a good benchmark for comparing the other costumes. I prefer this costume's alternate color, both because I'm sucker for red, as one look at my channel should tell you, and because the gold armor is a little more unique. 6 out of 10. His 2P is a more heavily armored look. While this is also a pretty typical knight's outfit, it does a couple of things to stand out. Most obviously, he's wearing a helmet, which I think is fine since this isn't his primary costume. In fact, it works really well to showcase a different aspect of his character. Hiding his face makes him look ominous and intimidating, which is perfect given his tragic backstory and his upcoming descent into villainy. His color palette contributes to this as well. A red and black color scheme is practically synonymous with evil, and this specific shade of rusty red is close to the color of Soul Edge itself. 6 out of 10. This costume's alternate color makes him look like a classic knight in shining armor, which, while not nearly as unique, is a nice option to have, and the sharp fins keep it from being totally generic. Also a 6 out of 10. His 3P ditches the plate armor altogether for a more casual look, though he still has a shirt of chainmail on underneath to show that he's ready for action. The mostly understated color palette helps draw attention to the highly saturated coat of arms emblazoned on his back. The limited graphics make it hard to tell what these charges are, but based on his future symbology, we can guess that they're probably phoenixes, dragons, or Pegasus is. Pegasi? Pegapeople? Anyway, even without knowing what the charges are, the half-red, half-blue design is easy to read as representative of Siegfried's internal struggle. It could even be foreshadowing that he wields Soul Edge and then Soulcalibur in the future, although that's kind of a stretch. This emblem and the dark stripes on his tunic help break up what would otherwise be a boring design and make it a 7 out of 10. Siegfried technically has a 4th costume in this game, but since it's a version of him that has been corrupted by Soul Edge, I'm going to wait to talk about it until the Nightmare episode. So that brings us to Soulcalibur, or Soulcalibur I as I'll be calling it to avoid confusion with the series as a whole or the sword for which it's named. The years following his transformation into Nightmare were a mixed bag for Siegfried. On the one hand, he was the mindless puppet of a cursed sword that tortured him with the memory of his father's murder to further its goal of devouring every soul in existence, thus drowning the world in blood and darkness. But on the other hand, he's hot now, so, seems like a fair trade. In all seriousness, aging Siegfried up was a great decision. The long blonde hair and the scar over his eye make him easily recognizable no matter what he's wearing. His 1P also gets a glow up in this game. It's still not super unique, but the improved graphics allow for some beautiful detailing on the armor, and the introduction of gold accents adds some nice visual contrast. 7 out of 10. His 2P goes for an edgier look, and I mean that literally. The graceful curves of his 1P have been replaced by sharp angles, which is especially obvious if you look at the pauldrons. This design is reminiscent of the Berserker armor from the manga series Berserk, especially in the concept art. The triangular shape language and darker color palette make Siegfried look less like a heroic knight and more like a morally grey mercenary, which makes sense for his character at this point in the story. My only complaint is that it could have done more to distinguish itself from his 1P. A cape or a helmet or maybe even a different hairstyle could have made it a real standout design. Still, it's an 8 out of 10. His 3P is just a palette swap of his 1P, which is a shame considering some of the other 3Ps we get in this game. I still like the red and gold color scheme, but since the costume it's based on is a lot stronger than his Soul Edge 1P, it's not enough to earn an extra point this time. 7 out of 10. Though Siegfried is not playable in his own right in Soulcalibur II, he appears as a costume for Nightmare. His armor is fine, but it's a lot plainer than any of his designs from the previous game. As much nostalgic love as I have for this costume, I can't give it more than a 6 out of 10. This look has been done better before and since. Speaking of which, I think his 1P from Soulcalibur III is the best version of his classic design. The armor is a brilliant gleaming silver, and the gold details are more obvious than they've ever been. As well as looking great, this heroic aesthetic is a fitting representation of Siegfried finally breaking free from Soul Edge and setting out on a path of redemption. The feathers on his shoulders are an odd choice, but not a bad one. They make the armor way more unique, add a splash of color to the design, and tie into the phoenix crest on his belt. They also have symbolic significance because something something reborn from the ashes. Listen, I just graduated from college, I think I've earned some half-hearted analysis. This costume is a 9 out of 10, and it only misses out on that final point because it has some tough competition. And by tough competition, I mean his 2P. This is a similar concept to his Soul Edge 3P, but way more extravagant. The bright red, white, and gold color scheme calls to mind nobility or even royalty, as does the coat of arms, but the sensible leather boots and gloves make him seem tough and practical. The asymmetry of the design is visually interesting and highlights the duality of his personality. This is also the first Siegfried costume to include a scarf, which will go on to be a staple of his. While I generally prefer long hair on Siegfried, the short hair works really well here, as it further differentiates this design from his 1P and doesn't have to vie with the scarf for your attention. This is, and will probably always be, my favorite Siegfried. This is how I envision King Arthur, 10 out of 10. That brings us to Soulcalibur IV and what is easily Siegfried's most divisive design. In a complete 180 from his days as Nightmare, Siegfried is bonded with the holy sword Soulcalibur, which has encased him in a protective layer of crystalline armor. This is a big departure from the grounded looks of his past. And it's infamous in the Soulcalibur community for looking too fantasy or too anime, but I love it. Is it over the top and ridiculous? Yes, but Soulcalibur IV was over the top and ridiculous. This game was the climactic final showdown between Siegfried and Nightmare, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Plus, this costume does some great visual storytelling. An idea that gets introduced in this game and expanded upon in Soulcalibur V is that Soulcalibur isn't all that dissimilar from Soul Edge. It too forms a symbiotic bond with its wielder. It too uses mind tricks and manipulation, and it too will go to any length to accomplish its goals, even if it means wiping out all life on Earth. It's fitting, therefore, not only that Soulcalibur is literally taking over Siegfried's body, but also that it's making him look a little bit more like Nightmare. Rather than silver, gold, and green like his other 1Ps, he's now wearing blue, just like the Azure Knight, and his pauldrons have become large and jagged, which gives him an intimidating aura. The intro cinematic to Soulcalibur V cranks this up a notch by giving him glowing eyes and a monstrous right arm, just like Nightmare. I am very close to giving this costume a 10 out of 10, but I think the in-game model lets the design down a little bit. The crystals are pretty opaque, which makes it hard to tell that they're growing over top of metal. I would have liked a slightly bluer scarf, but this is still an easy 9 out of 10. Wow, that was the longest section yet. Thankfully, I don't have as much to say about his 2P. It has a similar design to his 1P, but rather than crystal shards, it uses metal blades. I think this costume is a tad over-designed, especially in the chest area. I get what they were going for, but I don't like the short little vest or the dangly bits on either side, and the fabric on his waist isn't long enough to do anything interesting to his silhouette. I think that a regular tunic or surcoat with some gold trim would have made for a stronger and more elegant design. It's not bad, but it doesn't live up to his Soulcalibur III 1P. 7 out of 10. His Soulcalibur V 1P is exactly what he needed after the craziness of the last game. He isn't a magical anime protagonist anymore, he's a leader and a mentor, and that's reflected in every aspect of his design. Sort of similar to his Soulcalibur IV 2P, but it's much simpler, and the Phoenix emblem is more obvious than it's ever been. He's also one of the few characters in this game to actually look older after the 17-year time skip. 8 out of 10. His 2P is weird. The top half is perfect. It's a light tunic over a shirt of chainmail that looks like it was ripped straight out of Lord of the Rings. It's super stylish and serves as a nice contrast to the heavy armor of his 1P. But then he has these tight pink pants with stripes running down the side and these tall, weirdly shaped boots that flop around every time he moves. I don't get it. The top half would be a 10 out of 10, and the bottom half would be like a 2 out of 10, so I guess I'll split the difference and say 6 out of 10. I hope you didn't get too attached to Siegfried's beard, because Soulcalibur VI is a reboot of the series that retells the events of the early games. His armor in this game uses round-shaped language to an even greater extent than his Soulcalibur I 1P, which emphasizes his youth, and it has a bright color palette akin to his Soulcalibur III 1P. The coolest thing about this design is that you can see some remnants of Nightmare. There are blue stains on his armor, and his right arm has been discolored by its time as a giant mutated claw. As I said at the start of the video, some scars never truly heal. However, this costume has a fatal flaw, which is the lack of chainmail or any other undergarment. I mean, he's just begging to get stabbed in the arm. Soulcalibur is no stranger to half-naked fighters, and if that's what you're going for, it's fine. But this design is otherwise heavily armored, so the bare skin just looks out of place. 6 out of 10. Soulcalibur VI doesn't have any alternate costumes, but it does have alternate colors. His color 2 simply swaps the gold and silver and gives him a blue scarf. I like that this one is a little more colorful. 7 out of 10. His color 3 is all red and ditches the scarf. While I like the callback to his Soul Edge 2P, the monochromatic color scheme isn't as interesting as the other options. 5 out of 10. And his color 4 is this strange blue and pink color scheme, which I think is inspired by the particle effects of his Dark Legacy special ability. While it's not my cup of tea, I like that one of his color options is so wild and outside the box, so I'll give it the same score as the default color, 6 out of 10. And with that, we have ranked every single Siegfried costume, and none of them scored below a 5 out of 10. Maybe I'm just biased, but I think that Siegfried consistently has a really solid character design. At his absolute worst, he's just kind of generic and unmemorable, and at his best, he's a strong contender for my favorite costume in the whole series. But that's just my opinion, so what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. If I get enough comments, I might make a follow-up video where I respond to your opinions. Also, let me know which character you'd like to see next. Episode 2 is going to be about Nightmare, because that only seems fitting, but after that, anyone is fair game. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.